If I asked you who you are, you'd probably tell me about your personality traits, your strengths and weaknesses, your likes and dislikes. You describe these characteristics as if they were fixed. Inherent qualities as immutable as your height or eye color. But what if I told you that most of what you consider your personality is actually just a collection of habits you've practiced for so long that they feel inevitable? What if your weaknesses are simply behaviors you've rehearsed until they became your default? What would become possible if you stopped confusing your practices with your potential? The most profound limitations in your life aren't external, they're the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. I'm not a morning person, I'm bad with money, I'm naturally disorganized. I don't have willpower. We state these practice limitations as if they're genetic realities, immutable truths about our essential nature. And in doing so, we lock ourselves into identities that were never our destiny, just our default based on past behavior patterns we can absolutely change. There's a thief in this room right now. This thief doesn't steal wallets or jewelry. This thief takes something far more valuable. This thief steals your future, steals your potential, steals the person you were born to become. And the most frightening part, you've invited this thief in. You've made this thief comfortable. You've given this thief a permanent place in your mind, your heart, your daily habits. What is this thief? It's the biggest lie you still believe about yourself, the lie that says you are what you've always been. The lie that says your past determines your future. The lie that says your current limitations are your permanent reality. I want to tell you something that may shock you. The person you believe yourself to be doesn't exist. That identity, that collection of limitations, habits, and beliefs you call me is nothing more than a story. A narrative constructed from selected memories, reinforced by repetition, and protected by fear. It's not who you are. It's who you've practiced being. Let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed how fiercely you defend your limitations? How quickly you rush to explain why you can't do something, why you'll never change, why your circumstances are different from others who've succeeded. I'm just not good with money. I've always struggled with my weight. I'm not a morning person. I don't have the education. My family has always been like this. We speak these sentences with such conviction as if we're stating fundamental laws of the universe. We don't say, I've practiced poor financial habits. We say, I'm bad with money, as if financial management were encoded in our DNA rather than learned behavior. The moment you say I am followed by a limitation, you've fallen for the biggest lie. You've confused your practiced behaviors with your essential nature. You've mistaken your habits for your identity. And in that moment, transformation becomes impossible, not because you can't change, but because you've defined yourself as someone who doesn't. This is the most devastating form of identity theft, not when someone steals your information, but when you surrender your potential by accepting a false, limited identity as your unchangeable truth. Tonight, I want to walk with you through a process of liberation. Not just inspiration that fades by morning, but liberation that rewrites the operating system of your life. Because when you recognize the lie you've been living, you create the space for truth to emerge. And the truth is always more magnificent, more powerful, and more filled with possibility than the lie ever allowed you to see. The lie begins with a fundamental misunderstanding about human nature. You see, most people believe that behavior follows belief, that you must first believe something about yourself before you can act accordingly. They wait to feel confident before taking action. They wait to feel motivated before making changes. They wait to feel worthy before pursuing their dreams. But this sequence is precisely backward. Belief doesn't create behavior. Behavior creates belief. Think about it. How did you come to believe anything about yourself? Through repeated experience, through consistent action, through practicing certain behaviors until they felt natural, inevitable, even just who I am. You didn't emerge from the womb believing you were bad at public speaking or excellent with numbers or incapable of discipline. You practiced behaviors that produced results. And then you constructed beliefs to explain those results. The belief didn't come first, it was the after effect of behavior. Here's where this insight becomes revolutionary. If behavior creates belief, then new behaviors can create new beliefs even without waiting for your feelings to change first. You don't need to feel confident to act confident. You don't need to feel motivated to act motivated. You don't need to feel disciplined to act disciplined. And once you act these ways consistently, your beliefs about who you are will inevitably shift to accommodate the new evidence. This is why affirmations without actions are useless. Words alone can't override behaviors. This is why vision boards without daily practices don't produce results. Images can't override habits. This is why knowing better doesn't automatically translate to living better. Information without implementation creates frustration, not transformation. The fundamental law of human development isn't believe it to achieve, it's practice it to become it. Let me tell you about two people I worked with who demonstrate this principle perfectly. The first was a talented young professional who constantly talked about writing a book. He had the idea, the knowledge, the language skills. What he didn't have was the identity of a writer. I'm not really a writer, he would say. I just have this book idea. For 3 years, he remained stuck, not because he lacked ability, but because he was waiting to feel like a writer before developing the habits of a writer. Finally, I challenged him for 30 days. Write for 1 hour before you do anything else. Don't check email. Don't look at social media. Don't even shower. Wake up and write. Don't worry about feeling like a writer. Just practice the behavior of writing. He resisted initially. But what if I don't feel inspired? What if nothing good comes out? I told him, write anyway. Write badly. Write nonsense if you have to. But put in the hour. Within 2 weeks, something shifted. He stopped saying, I'm trying to write a book, and started saying, I'm writing a book. By day 30, he had established a new identity, not through affirmation, but through consistent behavior. 6 months later, his manuscript was complete. The second person was a middle-aged woman who had struggled with her health for decades. She had tried every diet, joined multiple gyms, bought exercise equipment that gathered dust in her garage. Nothing worked, not because the methods were flawed, but because she had built an identity around struggling with health. I've always been heavy, she would say. Everyone in my family is big. I've tried everything. I asked her to try something different. For the next 30 days, don't try to lose weight. Don't even step on a scale. Instead, every morning, simply say out loud, I make choices that honor my body. Then make just one choice that day that aligns with that statement. That's it? She asked, suspicious of the simplicity. That's it. I confirm, one statement. One aligned choice. Every day for 30 days. What happened was remarkable. By focusing on alignment between a simple statement and a single daily action, she began reconstructing her identity. The statement itself wasn't magical. It was the consistent alignment between words and behavior that gradually rewrote her self-concept. Within 6 months, she had lost 47 pounds. More importantly, she had stopped identifying as someone who struggled with weight and started identifying as someone who honors her body. The changed behavior preceded the changed belief. These stories illustrate something critical. The greatest barrier to transformation isn't lack of knowledge or resources. It's identity conflict. When your behaviors contradict your self-concept, your self-concept usually wins. Not because it's more powerful, but because it's been practiced longer. This is why so many efforts at change fail. They focus on modifying behaviors without addressing the underlying identity that those behaviors have created. It's like trying to install new software without updating the operating system. The system will reject what doesn't align with its core programming. The real breakthrough comes when you realize that identity isn't fixed or innate. It's practiced. It's rehearsed. It's habituated, which means it can be re-practiced, re-rehearsed, re-habituated, not through wishful thinking, but through deliberate, consistent action. So what is the biggest lie you still believe? It's that you are your past behaviors. It's that your practice limitations define your potential. It's that who you've been determines who you can become. The truth, the liberating truth, is that you are not what you've done. You are what you're doing, not your past actions, but your present practices. Not your history, but your current habits. Not where you've been, but the direction you're moving right now. This means transformation isn't about discovering some hidden, authentic self that's been buried beneath false behaviors. It's about deliberately practicing the behaviors of the person you choose to become until they feel as natural as the limited behaviors you've practiced until now. There's a saying that motivation doesn't last. Neither does bathing. That's why we recommend it daily. The same principle applies to identity transformation. It's not a one-time event or momentary inspiration. It's daily practice. It's consistent reinforcement. It's aligning your behaviors with your aspirations until your aspirations become your identity. I want you to try something right now. Think of one limitation you've assigned to your identity. A sentence that starts with I am followed by a constraint. Maybe I'm disorganized, or I am bad with names, or I am not a morning person. Now, I want you to reframe that statement as a practice behavior rather than an innate quality. I have practiced disorganization. I have practiced forgetting names. I have practiced struggling in the morning. Do you feel the difference? The first framing makes change seem impossible because it's attacking who you are. The second framing makes change completely accessible because it's just addressing what you've practiced. You are not your practices. You are the practitioner. You are not your habits. You are the habitat in which habits form. You are not your behaviors. You are the behavior who can choose new behaviors. This distinction isn't just semantic, it's the difference between permanent limitation and unlimited potential. It's the difference between this is just who I am and this is what I've practiced being. The biggest lie you still believe is that your identity is fixed rather than fluid, discovered rather than created, endured rather than chosen. And as long as this lie remains unexposed, transformation will always feel like an uphill battle against your authentic self, rather than a deliberate reshaping of who you're becoming. So what now? How do we move from recognizing the lie to living in truth? It begins with a simple but profound shift in daily awareness. Start noticing how often you use identity statements to describe temporary behaviors. Catch yourself when you say, I am, followed by a limitation. Replace I am with I have practiced being, and notice how this subtle shift opens new possibilities. Next, identify one aspect of your practice identity that no longer serves the person you want to become. One limitation you've accepted as just who I am, that's actually just what you've rehearsed. Then, design a simple daily practice that contradicts this limitation. If you've practiced being not a morning person, commit to rising 30 minutes earlier than necessary for the next 21 days. Not because early rising is inherently virtuous, but because it directly challenges a limitation you've accepted as identity. If you've practiced being bad with money, commit to tracking every expenditure, no matter how small, for the next 21 days. Not because tracking alone will solve financial challenges, but because it contradicts the practiced identity of financial unconsciousness. If you've practiced being socially awkward, commit to initiating one meaningful conversation daily for the next 21 days. Not because this automatically creates social fluency, but because it begins dismantling the practiced identity of social limitation. The specific practice matters less than the consistency of implementation. What you're doing is creating evidence that contradicts your limiting identity. You're establishing new neural pathways that, with repetition, become the path of least resistance, the new natural way of being. Remember, your brain believes what you repeatedly do, not what you occasionally say. Your nervous system responds to patterns, not promises. Your identity forms through consistent action, not occasional intention. This explains why temporary inspiration so rarely leads to permanent transformation. Inspiration might motivate initial action, but without consistent practice, the new behaviors never become integrated into identity. Without identity integration, regression to previous patterns is almost inevitable. This also explains why environments are so powerful in shaping behavior. Your environment isn't just where you live, it's what lives in you. It's the constant stream of influences that either reinforce or challenge your practiced identity. If you're serious about transformation, you must become intentional about your environment. Not just the physical spaces you occupy, but the people you surround yourself with, the media you consume, the conversations you engage in, the thoughts you rehearse. All of these constitute the environment that either nurtures new identity or reinforces old limitations. When you understand that identity is practiced rather than fixed, two powerful truths emerge. First, you recognize that your current limitations aren't your essence, they're just what you've rehearsed until now. Second, you realize that new practices can create new identity not through wishful thinking, but through consistent behavioral evidence that your old identity can no longer explain. This perspective completely transforms how you approach change. Instead of focusing on outcomes, I want to lose weight. I want more confidence. I want better relationships. You focus on identity. I practice healthy eating. I practice confident behaviors. I practice authentic connection. The outcomes follow naturally from the practiced identity. And here's something remarkable. Once a behavior becomes integrated into your identity, maintaining it requires almost no willpower. Think about behaviors that are already part of your identity. If you identify as a person who brushes their teeth daily, you don't need motivation to brush your teeth. You don't debate whether you feel like it. You don't require rewards or accountability. You just brush your teeth because that's what a person like you does. The same principle applies to any behavior. Once it's integrated into your identity, once it becomes what someone like me does, continuing the behavior becomes almost automatic. The initial practice requires effort, but the maintained identity becomes effortless. This is why focusing on identity transformation rather than behavior modification is so much more effective for creating lasting change. Behavior modification relies on continuous willpower. Identity transformation creates a new normal that requires minimal ongoing effort. But here's the crucial insight. Identity doesn't change through declaration. It changes through demonstration. Not through saying, but through doing. Not through asserting what kind of person you are, but through consistently behaving in alignment with the person you intend to become. This means transformation isn't about finding motivation. It's about developing discipline, the willingness to practice new behaviors before they feel natural, before they deliver rewards, before they align with your current self-concept. Discipline bridges the gap between what you've practiced being and what you're becoming. Have you noticed how many people wait for feelings to change before behaviors change? They say things like, I don't feel motivated to exercise, or I don't feel confident enough to speak up, or I don't feel disciplined enough to save money. They're waiting for emotional alignment before behavioral change. But that sequence virtually guarantees perpetual stagnation. Emotions follow behaviors more often than they precede them. You don't feel motivated and then exercise. You exercise and then feel motivated. You don't feel confident and then speak up. You speak up and then feel confident. You don't feel disciplined and then save money. You save money and then feel disciplined. The emotions you're waiting for are on the other side of the behavior you're avoiding. They're the result, not the prerequisite. Think about it this way. Confidence isn't a feeling you acquire and then express. Confidence is what you feel after you've repeatedly done things that initially made you uncomfortable. Motivation isn't something you obtain and then apply. Motivation is what you experience after you've started moving toward meaningful goals. Discipline isn't a trait you develop and then demonstrate. Discipline is what you recognize in yourself after you've consistently chosen long-term benefit over short-term comfort. This insight completely inverts the traditional approach to change. Instead of waiting to feel different so you can act different, you act different so you can feel different. Instead of waiting for identity to shift so behavior can follow, you shift behavior so identity can follow. When you understand this principle, you realize that the starting point for transformation isn't inspiration, education, or motivation. It's action. Specifically, action that contradicts your current practiced identity while reinforcing your desired identity. Let me ask you a question that might feel uncomfortable. What behavior, if practiced consistently for the next 30 days, would most directly challenge the limiting identity you've accepted as just who you are? For some of you, it might be initiating difficult conversations you've avoided by telling yourself, I'm not confrontational. For others, it might be dedicating 1 hour daily to a project you've postponed by saying, I'm not creative enough. For still others, it might be preparing healthy meals instead of ordering takeout with the explanation, I'm too busy to cook. Whatever that behavior is for you, I want you to recognize something profound. Practicing that behavior consistently, even if imperfectly, will do more to transform your identity than all the books, seminars, and affirmations in the world. Because identity responds to evidence, not intention. And consistent behavior creates irrefutable evidence that your old identity can no longer explain. This approach to transformation isn't simple, but it is straightforward. It doesn't require exceptional talent, rare opportunity, or perfect conditions. It requires only the willingness to practice behaviors that contradict your limiting identity until your identity evolves to accommodate the new evidence. The question isn't whether this approach works. The question is whether you're willing to work the approach consistently, patiently, deliberately, until your behavior creates a new normal that your old identity can no longer explain. Let me share a powerful truth that's often overlooked in discussions of personal development. Purpose precedes practice. When you have a compelling why, the challenging how becomes more manageable. When you're clear about what you're creating and why it matters. The daily disciplines that create new identity feel meaningful rather than merely difficult. Most people approach transformation backward. They focus first on what they need to do differently, without clarifying why the change matters deeply. But behaviors without purpose rarely persist long enough to reshape identity. Ask yourself, why do I want to change this aspect of my practice identity? Not the surface reason, But the deeper purpose, not just I want to be healthier, but I want the energy and vitality to fully engage with the people and purposes that matter most to me. Not just I want more financial stability, but I want the freedom and options that come from financial intelligence so I can make contributions that align with my highest values. When your daily practices connect to profound purpose, transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. You're no longer trying to force yourself to be different. You're aligning your behaviors with what matters most to you. And that alignment creates the sustained action that transforms identity. Here's a truth about purpose: it's always bigger than you. If your purpose for transformation is solely self-focused, looking better, feeling better, having more, it probably won't generate the sustained motivation required for identity level change. Purpose that powers transformation usually connects to contribution beyond yourself, how your growth enables you to serve something larger than your own comfort or advancement. Consider the difference between I want to be financially successful so I can have nice things, and I want to be financially successful so I can create opportunities for others who don't have the advantages I've had. The first purpose might motivate temporary effort, but it rarely sustains the consistent practice required for identity transformation. The second purpose connects to something beyond self-interest, creating a deeper wellspring of motivation that persists through challenges and setbacks. This doesn't mean transformation requires selflessness. It means that sustainable transformation connects to purposes larger than immediate self-gratification. It connects to values, contribution, and meaning that transcend momentary comfort or convenience with clear purpose established. The next step is designing practices that directly challenge your limiting identity while building your desired identity. These practices need three key qualities to effectively reshape identity. They must be specific, measurable, and consistent. Specific means you know exactly what behavior you're practicing. Not I'll try to be more organized, but I'll spend the first 15 minutes of each workday planning my priorities. Not I'll eat better, but I'll ensure every meal includes fresh vegetables. Specificity eliminates the ambiguity that allows old patterns to persist. Measurable means you can definitively determine whether you completed the practice. Not I'll be more positive, but I'll write down 3 things I'm genuinely grateful for each morning. Not I'll work on my relationship, but I'll have a 15-minute distraction-free conversation with my partner daily. Measurability creates clear accountability to yourself. Consistent means the practice occurs regularly enough to create new neural pathways. Occasional practices don't reshape identity. They might create momentary changes in behavior, but they don't establish new normal. Consistency might mean daily practice, or it might mean the same practice every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. What matters is predictable recurrence that trains your nervous system to anticipate and eventually automate the behavior. With specific, measurable, consistent practices designed. The final element is creating environmental conditions that support rather than sabotage your new identity. Your environment isn't neutral. It's either nurturing your new identity or reinforcing your old one. This might mean removing temptations that trigger old behaviors. It might mean adding cues that prompt new behaviors. It might mean surrounding yourself with people who embody the identity you're developing. It might mean consuming media that reinforces your new values and beliefs. Environmental design isn't cheating, it's strategic. It's recognizing that willpower is limited, but environmental influence is constant. By deliberately structuring your environment to support your new identity, you reduce the amount of willpower required to maintain new behaviors until they become automatic. Let me emphasize something critical. The path of transformation isn't linear. You won't practice new behaviors for 21 days and then magically possess a completely transformed identity. You'll experience successes and setbacks, progress and regression, clarity and confusion. This isn't failure. It's the natural rhythm of profound change. The key is to treat setbacks as data, not defeat. When you revert to old patterns, and you will, because that's part of the process, don't interpret this as evidence that change is impossible. Interpret it as valuable information about which triggers, environments, or beliefs still require attention. Then adjust your practices accordingly and continue moving forward. Remember, transformation isn't about perfection, it's about direction. It's not about never falling back into old patterns. It's about falling back less frequently, recovering more quickly, and maintaining clear commitment to your new direction regardless of temporary setbacks. This brings us to perhaps the most important insight about identity transformation. It requires both grace and grit. Grace to accept yourself during the messy, imperfect process of change. Grit to persist with new practices even when they feel uncomfortable, unnatural, or temporarily unrewarding. Without grace, transformation becomes a form of self-rejection, trying to become someone else because you can't accept who you are now. Without grit, transformation remains perpetually incomplete, a series of enthusiastic starts followed by premature surrenders before new identity can form. 4. The integrated approach combines compassionate acceptance of where you are with unwavering commitment to where you're going. It says, I accept who I've practiced being until now, and I'm committed to practicing new behaviors that align with who I'm becoming. Let's bring this journey full circle. We began by identifying the biggest lie you still believe, that your identity is fixed rather than practiced, permanent rather than malleable, something to be discovered rather than created. We've explored how this lie keeps you trapped in limitations that feel like truth but are actually just well-rehearsed patterns. Now, I want to offer you a simple but powerful framework for living beyond this lie, a daily practice that gradually dismantles limiting identity while constructing expansive identity. First, start each day with a simple declaration: I am not my past behaviors. I am the choices I make today. This statement isn't magical, but it establishes a crucial mindset that today's actions, not yesterday's patterns, determine who you're becoming. Second, identify one behavior that directly challenges your limiting identity. Make this behavior specific, measurable, and meaningful. Then, commit to practicing this behavior daily. Not because you feel like it or because it immediately delivers results, but because it's what the person you're becoming would do. Third, end each day with reflection. Ask yourself, how did my behaviors today align with the person I'm becoming? What evidence am I creating that contradicts my limiting identity? This reflection isn't about judgment, but awareness, noticing the gap between practice, limitation, and emerging potential. Finally, remember that transformation happens through consistency, not intensity. It's better to practice a small behavior that challenges limiting identity every day than to attempt dramatic change sporadically. Small, consistent actions accumulate into identity shift far more effectively than occasional heroic efforts. I want to leave you with this thought: the person you believe yourself to be is both less and more than you imagine. Less. Because that identity isn't your essence, it's just the sum of behaviors you've practiced until they felt inevitable. Because your potential extends far beyond the boundaries of that practice identity into territories you've not yet explored. The biggest lie you've believed is that who you are determines what you can do. The liberating truth is that what you repeatedly do determines who you become. The choice before you isn't whether to change, you're already changing. Every day, through the behaviors you practice and the thoughts you rehearse. The choice is whether that change happens by default or by design. Whether you continue reinforcing limitations you've outgrown or begin practicing possibilities that reflect your true potential. Your identity isn't your destiny. It's your current practice. And practices can change. Not through wishful thinking or positive declarations, but through consistent behaviors that create new evidence about who you are. The thief we identified at the beginning, that voice insisting your limitations are your identity, can be evicted. Not through confrontation, but through consistent contradictory evidence. Not by fighting against what you've been, but by deliberately practicing what you're becoming. Your future self is calling you forward, not into perfect, immediate transformation, but into daily practices that gradually reshape what feels natural, inevitable, and just who I am. The journey isn't always comfortable, but it leads to the most profound freedom possible. Liberation from the lie of fixed identity into the truth of unlimited becoming.